In this video, we're going to look at the rise of Hitler. We're going to start in 1900, when Hitler sort of emerges from relative obscurity, to 1929, with the beginning of the Great Depression and really his quick ascent to become the leader of the German state. First, to talk about the origins of Hitler. Hitler is from Austria. He is born on the southern border of Austria and Germany. He has sort of very humble roots. He's the son of a Austrian customs official. They're lower middle class. And what we know about Hitler's early life is that it's fairly unpleasant. His father was very stern, very cold, very aloof. He wasn't very attentive to his family. And it was not a very pleasant or happy time. Hitler's first ambition, and this is really from 1900 to 1913, is Hitler had this vision of becoming an artist. And he saw himself as this sort of potential great artist. Hitler relocates to Vienna, and he attempts in Vienna to try out for the Austrian National Academy, sort of the premier art school in Austria. Unfortunately, he is denied admission, and sort of this is the first dash of his dreams to become a great artist. But from 1907 to 1913, Hitler lives this very, I guess we would probably call it bohemian lifestyle. You might even call it today hipster lifestyle. He lives in a boarding house. He basically tries to write. He writes a couple plays, reads poetry, attends the theater, loves Wagner, loves attending the opera, but doesn't have really a proper job. He gets by painting watercolor postcards to tourists, and that's about it. He doesn't really emerge. He doesn't really emerge until 1914, with the beginning of World War I. 1914, Hitler very proudly enlists in the German army. And because he is sort of a very right-wing nationalist, because Hitler is a right-wing nationalist, this is fulfilling a lot of his sort of vision of, his destiny and the destiny of the German Empire. So in 1914, he enlists in the German army. From 1914 to 1918, Hitler is a runner on the Western Front. So he's essentially running communications from trench line to trench line. He's wounded twice. He's wounded in 1916. He's also wounded in 1918. 1918, he's gassed in Mons. And he is recuperating at a hospital in 1918 when he learns of the armistice and the end of the war. And that becomes sort of maybe the critical moment for Hitler, when he sort of transitions from this sort of frustrated bohemian artist to a political leader. So how did he become a political leader? Well, we have to look at the origins of the Nazi Party. The Nazi Party really began as the German Workers' Party. German Workers' Party was a small right-wing party. It was begun in 1919 by Anton Drexler. And so it's really a reaction against the growth of the left-wing socialism forces in Germany, and also a reaction against the loss of the Germans to the Allied forces. In 1919, Hitler joins the German Workers' Party. He starts initially in recruitment, but his political talent is soon recognized, and by 1920, he is leading this very small party. In 1920, they change the name. The name becomes, they go from the German Workers' Party to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP, and that is the Nazi Party. Nazi comes from what's the German translation, National Socialist. So Nazi is actually an acronym. The Nazi Party is not as clearly articulated in its ideology in 1920 as it is in 1925. The first thing that Hitler really contributes to as a leader of the Nazi Party, he writes the 25-point plan. The 25-point plan is a mixture of both left-wing and right-wing elements. So it's embracing right-wing elements. It's embracing both German nationalism, but some socialist elements. And Hitler also adds to the Nazi Party the stormtroopers, or the brown shirts. The stormtroopers, they're ex-World War I soldiers. They were members of the Freikorps or the Free Corps. Ex-World War I soldiers. They had military training. They tended to be right-wing. They also tended to be armed. And they had first provided security for the Nazi Party meetings, but they become the chief instruments of violence. And when we talk about political violence and lawlessness, it really begins with the stormtroopers, or you hear them referred to as the brown shirts, because that was their uniform, these brown sort of paramilitary combat shirts. And so this is by 1920. By 1920, Hitler's the head of the Nazi Party. You have sort of its violent instigating force, the stormtroopers, and you also have the beginnings of a clear political agenda. In 1923, we see the first real attempt by Hitler to seize power. 1923, it's the Munich Beer Hall Putsch. What Hitler attempts to do, he's in southern Germany in Munich, and at a meeting of other right-wing politicians, he essentially jumps up on a table at the Munich Beer Hall and says, we have declared the revolution, we're going to march on Berlin, and the Nazi Party is going to sort of take charge of the government. So he was attempting sort of a violent military revolution, and that's what a putsch is. A putsch is just simply a coup or a revolt. So he declares the revolution in Munich on November 8th, and on November 9th he is arrested along with other Nazis, and one of his buddies is shot and killed, and he actually is sentenced to prison, or he's actually put on trial and he's sentenced to prison for treason. Now Hitler gets 5 years, and he ultimately only serves 9 months. Munich teaches Hitler a couple things. The first thing that it teaches him is that he's going to have to hold his nose. And what he means is the attempt at a violent military revolution was unsuccessful and didn't appear to be successful. So what he realizes is that he's going to need a political revolution. And so what he means by a political revolution is they're going to have to hold their nose and join the Reichstag. So the Nazis are going to have to sit next to the communists and the Catholics and the other elements of the left wing. And they're going to have to sort of bring the government down from the inside. The other thing that Hitler learns is that the socialist elements of the 25-point plan were turning off members of the middle class. And so he actually abandons, after the Munich Beer Hall Putsch, a lot of the left-wing elements of the 25-point plan. And the Nazi Party takes a firm right-wing political agenda. While in prison, Hitler writes Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. Mein Kampf is one part political autobiography, one part ideological screed. And in Mein Kampf, it's published in 1925, Mein Kampf clearly outlines Hitler's political ideology. It doesn't talk specifically about how he's going to implement it, that's going to come later, but it clearly states what he believes in. So what does Hitler believe in? Well, it's of course, is going to be very right-wing, very radical, and very sort of offensive to modern ears. The first thing that Hitler is going to take offense to is anti-communism, and Hitler is going to be staunchly anti-communist. Now, this is one of the key elements of fascism, because fascism begins as sort of a reaction to communism. And so Hitler's going to see that, one, the communists are one of the key enemies of the German state. And the second thing he's going to look at is he's going to call for revision to the Treaty of Versailles. And so with this, he's essentially joining a camp that was very, very popular with all sorts of people, both on the left and the right in Germany, calling for the revision of Versailles. And so this becomes very popular and very sort of a key item of support. Where Hitler deviates from, say, Mussolini or other more moderate Germans is sort of his racial theories. Now, Hitler does not invent anti-Semitism. Hitler is really riding the wave of anti-Semitism that was prevalent not only in Germany but in Europe throughout the late 19th and early 20th century. And he's really combining elements of social Darwinism, with early ideas of eugenics. And that's going to sort of buttress or support his sort of right-wing nationalistic vision. And so his right-wing nationalistic vision, they have Germans, so they have good ancestral Germans, and then you have Untermenschen. So Untermenschen are subhuman. And these would be groups like the Jews, Slavs, Gypsies, other ethnic groups, homosexuals, anyone that didn't fit into sort of his mold of what is the proper German citizen. And in 1925, in Mein Kampf, Hitler clearly outlines, and it's based on his idea of social Darwinism, eugenics, and sort of German genetic superiority, that what do you do with these subhuman populations? What do you do with the Jews? What do you do with the Slavs? And he's saying this in 1925. And it is, according to Hitler, extermination is the solution. You must exterminate these populations. And so one of the arguments that Hitler somehow surprised people or wasn't really clear with his ideology, well, that's simply not true. Hitler was absolutely clear with his ideology because it's all spelled out in Mein Kampf. Another component of Hitler's ideology is this idea of the Volk. The Volk are the people. And these people for Hitler are the ideal German community. And that's going to be the vision, or almost sort of the utopia that he's going to try to create in Germany in this new Reich. Now, Reich is going to be German for empire. And so he's going to try to create a new German empire made up of this Volk, or this ideal Germanic community. Well, what do you need for this ideal Germanic community? You need Lebensraum. Lebensraum is living space. And so what Hitler is saying, and again, this is 1925, Hitler is saying he needs to expand. So our Volk, well, they need places to live, they need material resources, they need living space. But where does Hitler need to expand to? Well, he needs to expand to Eastern Europe and reclaim those parts of Germany that were taken by Poland, by Czechoslovakia, by Hungary, and that is going to be expansion. And this coincides with Hitler's idea of the Untermenschen, because who lives in Eastern Europe? Well, there's a large Jewish population, there's a large Slavic population, and he sees these as potential slave labor. He sees them as obstacles, but this sort of all just fits into his idea of racial hygiene.